Horizon Chance, Home Research UX, and this is Irish Potato Famine, Isle of Blight, Extra History Part 1 by the channel Extra Credits. The potato blight hit the United States first before it came to Ireland and other countries. Really? I thought it originated in Ireland because it's so well known, it's so known for the Irish people, right? Because they ran away from there and went to the United States. Conan O'Brien constantly mentions it, I guess. Anytime somebody says potato, he always takes offense. Why? Because I'm Irish? Yeah, jokingly, obviously. But what made it particularly devastating in Ireland was the factor of human influence, like most things. Behind the scenes bureaucracy that prioritized economics over human lives. Again, like most things. Yeah, let's watch this one. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the Rick Sunday, the link in the description. Check out the cast over playlist like history with all my historical videos, Holy Sarcastic Production, CGP Grey, TSU, Kaskazar in a nutshell. Yeah, let's watch it.
The first thing the farmer notices is the smell. An earthy rot in the fields. The Irishman walks into his potato field to find the plants turning brown and wilting. He digs up a tuber and finds it slimy like a bar of soap. When he slices it open, brown mucus oozes out. The whole crop is the same. It'll be a hungry year, but he will survive. Because this isn't Ireland in the famine year of 1845. It's the United States 2 years earlier. And this man has no idea how this blight will devastate the country of his birth. The Irish potato famine ranks as one of Europe's worst agricultural disasters. An event so momentous that it not only defined a generation, it scattered a people to the winds. When the blight arrived in 1845, Ireland had a population of 8.2 million. Within a decade, though, a third of it was gone. Around 1.1 million died from starvation and disease, while 2 million immigrated abroad. Actually, you know what? Strike that. Immigration isn't the right word. It was flight.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. An evacuation. During the height of the famine years, when children's mouths were stained green from eating grass and dogs scavenged graveyards, people brawled on the docks for space aboard the overcrowded vessels. Most didn't even...
Damn, that paints the picture, doesn't it? I mean, I'm imagining right now, around that time, obviously, famine is really fucked up since it kills off your food source, and without food, I mean, how do you survive? So I'm imagining kids, eating grass because that's the only way they can survive. How fucked up the scenario is, right? Dogs basically just walking graveyards and everywhere to find foods. Damn, this is just fucked up. And everybody just wants to run away from the country because there is no food because of famine.
Care where the ship was headed, as long as it wasn't Ireland. Yet Ireland was not the only country, or even the first, to experience the blight. The fungus responsible emerged in the United States in 1843, hitching a ride to Europe in cargo holds. Farmers attempting to strengthen European potato strains may have even accidentally imported it when they crossbred their potatoes with American stock. And strengthened by a rainy summer and carried by the wind, the fungus stormed the continent. During the summer of 1845, news of the blight filled European newspapers. Belgium had lost 87% of its potato crop. Flanders, 92%. Holland lost 70%. Germany and France got off relatively light, only losing a fifth of their harvest. Rumors of starvation leaked out of Russia and Poland, while English farmers saw similar devastation. Governments prepared for a season of hunger and instability. The potato, after all, was the staple diet of Europe's emerging industrial working class.
Yeah.
This miracle plant, imported from Peru, could produce 2 to 4 times more calories per acre than grain. Cheap and easy to prepare, it allowed Europe's shrinking agricultural sector to feed its booming manufacturing workforce. And between 1750 and 1850, the European population nearly doubled, partially due to the potato. Any threat to the potato crop was a serious problem. In fact, these crop failures would help spur the wave of revolutions that racked Europe in 1848. But here the story of Ireland diverges, because...
Damn. This is why, nobody should rely on one particular crop. It's not like they had much of a choice back then. Potato was just that easy, right? We know that even today. Potato, calories and everything. It's very easy to make it. How little you need of potato to just survive because it's calorie dense. But still, this is just a reminder, like, doesn't matter what, no country, no continent should rely on one type of thing. because this is just a potato famine, right? It just affect potatoes. If Europe had other things too, that they invested more than just potatoes, they wouldn't have suffered so much.
Because while all these countries experienced economic hardship and social change, Ireland alone starved. The reasons for that are complicated, but they boil down to two factors. The first was a land system that made Ireland uniquely vulnerable to a crop failure. And the second factor was human. A group of British leaders governing from London who saw the famine relief as a vehicle for reforming the Irish economy and instructing the people's moral character. Throughout the crisis, British policymakers would make economic reform their primary objective, with saving lives as a distant secondary goal. The Blight indeed was, as British politicians argued, an act of God, unstoppable and inevitable. The famine, by contrast...
what an asshole, right? What an asshole, sitting in London, basically shitting on Irish people, not caring about the human lives but their own personal goals. That's just fucked up, right? I mean, that just pisses me off when I think about it. At the times of crisis, you do that. That's just the lowest form.
Contrast was the work of men. But that was still to come. In the summer of 1845, British Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel was tracking reports of blight. He worried about it striking England, of course, but he knew that if it took hold in Ireland, the result would be catastrophic. Technically, Ireland had been a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland since 1801, but in a practical sense, it had been the very first step in the British colonial empire. The English had ruled it directly or indirectly for centuries. In that time, the British Crown had gradually dispossessed native Irish Catholic families, confiscating their land and gifting it to English and Scots Protestants who were considered more reliably loyal, while Catholic countries sponsored a series of Irish revolts against the Protestant English, and tensions grew. The climax came when Oliver Cromwell reconquered Ireland after a rebellion, completing the process of land confiscation and totally replacing Irish landowners with English and Scots, the so-called Anglo-Irish. And it was bloody. Conservative estimates suggest that Cromwell's invasion, along with the famine it caused, may have killed 10% of the Irish population. To prevent another uprising, Cromwell and later British governments passed a series of penal laws restricting Catholic rights. Catholics could not hold public office, own firearms, or be admitted to the bar as lawyers. They couldn't own a horse worth over £5, vote, teach school.
Just because you're Catholic, you can do that. I mean, how does that make sense on the paper, right? How do they justify it? Like, you can't be a lawyer because a lawyer? Catholics are stupid. Is that what he's saying? I mean, why can't Catholics be lawyer? What's the justification behind that? That's just effed up, man.
Or marry a Protestant. There were restrictions on how they could own land, and when willing land to children, they couldn't give it intact to the eldest, and had to break it up equally among all their children. Churches couldn't be built of stone and had to sit far from roads, and they couldn't attend universities at home or abroad. And 80% of the Irish population was Catholic. These laws were designed to bar Irish Catholics from all forms of political and economic advancement.
Yeah, seriously.
And while they were gradually repealed,
no college locally or abroad? I mean, that's just stupid at that point.
Last vanishing in 1829, it would take generations for the Irish to recover economically. And on top of that, these landlords charged astronomical rent on the land, barely allowing the native Irish farmers to survive. And the whole thing took place in a system of middlemen so convoluted that... Okay, here's an analogy. Imagine someone owns an apartment building today. That's the landowner. They don't want to manage it, so they pass it off to a middle person to manage. Now the middle person wants to make a profit and knows there's a lot of demand, so they jack up the rent. And to make more profits, they subdivide some of the larger apartments into smaller ones. Now, under the pressure of making this exorbitant rent, some of the building's tenants start to get roommates or rent some of their bedrooms on Airbnb, further subdividing their own apartment. Wow, this sounds really familiar. Oh, hi NYC, I didn't see you in this analogy. Anyway, that's basically what happened to Irish farmers. In fact, some of the landowners, known as absentee landlords, hadn't even lived in Ireland for generations. The trend was bad, Then events made it worse. During the Napoleonic Wars, Irish goods suddenly became a major part of British imports, as the war cut off suppliers in France. Things improved for the Irish, with many turning to new manufacturing jobs. But then, Napoleon was defeated. French goods returned, and the burgeoning industrial sector collapsed. Out-of-work weavers and tradesmen flooded the countryside, engaging in ludicrous bidding wars for small plots of farmland, promising to pay rents the land could never sustain. Irish farmers began cultivating land that had never been farmed before: rocky hillsides, beaches, and bogs. The land, subdivided already through the inheritance laws and the greed of landowners, got subdivided further. And middlemen for those landlords, increasingly disappointed with returns from potato farmers, evicted whole villages to use the land for cattle raising, which squeezed the farmers even further. By 1841,
Bro, I'm not gonna lie, this level of oppression by the British, I'm surprised how every Irish, 80% or so population of Ireland, didn't just suddenly revolt like this is just bullshit. First of all the laws that were implemented is just effed up, right? If you're Catholic, you can't even take college, and all the other shit that he talked about. You can't be a lawyer. How does that make sense? Like, you pass shitty laws, but there has to be, some bullshit that you need to convince people, like, oh, it's because of this. So in the eyes of the people, it doesn't completely feel preposterous, basically. So why, this kind of thing, he just said, oh, this is the law, and people didn't just immediately revolt, like, what the hell? So after that, people just literally, evicting entire villages, right? And even at that point, people are not reaching breaking point.
45% of all agricultural holdings were under 5 acres, a consequence of population explosion paired with a land system that depended on chains of landlords, often 3 or 4 deep, leading back to England. Only one thing allowed people to survive. You guessed it, the potato. A single acre of potato plants could produce 6 tons of crop per year, enough to feed a family of 6. No other crop provided such a yield. But many Irish families were larger than that, and the rent still had to be paid. In the decades leading up to the famine, the shrinking plots of land gave most no more than a subsistence living. Ireland was already the poorest country in Europe. Before the subdivision, most families at least had a cow. But in the decades before the famine, the more expensive cow disappeared, replaced by a pig. Milk, butter, eggs, and herring disappeared from the peasants' diets. Cash crops like barley and oats vanished, replaced by more potatoes. Visitors were shocked at the depth of Irish poverty. The majority of the country went shoeless, and many in the countryside wore literal rags. In towns, landless workers lived by the pawn shop, pawning their Sunday clothes after attending church, buying them back on Friday payday, wearing them to church again, and then repeating the cycle. But those same visitors were often astounded by the peasants' hardiness. Irish peasants were strong and often good-looking. Scientific testing, so popular in the Victorian age, found that the average Irish peasant was both taller and stronger than both English and Belgian ones, and it was due to their diet.
Yeah, this kind of feels similar, right? Because right now, all the things that British did at this point to Irish basically made them some kind of a slave, right? Because every effort they put into that, British basically took it. Rent and shit. They restricted how much prosperous they can be. They restricted their economy. Basically they were scraping and surviving barely. So, they became really hardy people, right? So obviously they were physically more taller and, that kind of thing.
Eating nutritious, vitamin-filled potatoes 3 meals a day. But in August of 1845, Irish farmers walked into their fields and smelled rot. The Blight was in Ireland, but London had a plan to use this crisis to remake Ireland. A plan that would bring down Prime Minister Peel.
Look, I know throughout the history there has been really inhumane things that happen, but sometimes I get really get angry, right, with certain things. At the times like this crisis, these assholes are still thinking about their benefits and does not give an F about human lives at all. First of all, people in London restricted Irish at every turn. So, they know they did that, right? When the Blight comes, they know that Irish people won't survive because of what we did. And they highly rely on potatoes, so they really won't survive. This is the time where, people would go, it doesn't matter, what, at least this is the time we should help them out. Even then, they didn't care about the human lives. That's just fucked up, right? Alright people, that was the Irish potato famine, Isle of Blight, extra ship part 1, but it's in extra credits. I now understand why, Irish and potato are basically linked, why people make jokes and things, because that's the only food they could have afford, under the British rule like that. Alright, if you like my reaction, like and subscribe, check out the links and there's a link in the description, check out the cards or play, check out the cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.